Thank my colleagues Rhonda Moore and Tara Mirza for their huge contributions to making this evening's crunch happen. If you're not familiar with the IOG, the Institute is an independent not-for-profit think tank with expertise in public governance. We offer a range of advisory services, leadership and learning offerings, research, and thought leadership. And we convene discussion events like Policy Crunch. This evening, our topic is Disruption in the Lab, Government Science and Innovation in the New Normal. And we've assembled an excellent panel of government scientists to crunch this topic with us. Before I go further, I'd like to offer a land acknowledgement for those of us in Ottawa. And for those of you joining us from elsewhere, I encourage you to add your own acknowledgement in the chat. We pay respect to the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, who are the traditional guardians of this land. We acknowledge their long-standing relationship with this territory, which remains unceded. We pay respect to all Indigenous people in this region from all nations across Canada who call Ottawa home. We acknowledge the traditional knowledge keepers, both young and old, and we honor their courageous leaders, past, present, and future. For those who have joined us before, you'll know that we divide these sessions into 3 parts. In the first part, I will introduce the topic and our speakers, and they will each provide brief opening remarks. In the second part, then, we'll open the floor for questions from you, the audience. Please submit your questions via the chat function on Twitter using hashtag PolicyCrunch, on our Policy Crunch Slack channel, and we're also live streaming to our YouTube channel. So those of you watching there can submit questions via the YouTube chat. Then for the third part, at the top of the hour, we'll wrap up the formal part of the program, switch off the live feed, and sort each of our speakers into breakout rooms. This will give those of you in the Zoom an opportunity to continue the conversation and perhaps ask that question that didn't get asked in plenary. At 7 p.m., we'll have you enter in the chat function the name of the speaker that you'd like to visit, and Tara will move you into the appropriate room. We'll wrap those discussions up around 7:20 or so, and say so long until next month. Speaking of next month, we will close out this 3rd season of Policy Crunch on June 1st. We hope you'll be able to join us for a Policy Crunch on virtual Parliament. But first, let's crunch government science in the new normal. I'll be the moderator this evening. As many of you know, I've been a long-time public servant in science and innovation policy, and since 2017, I've been on an interchange here at IOG, where Rhonda and I are now leading a major new research initiative called Beyond Endless Frontiers, renewing the social contract between science, innovation, and society. I'd like to use the moderator's privilege to tell you a bit about this collaborative initiative before introducing our speakers. The Beyond Endless Frontiers in the title is a reference to the famous report, Science, the Endless Frontier, but written by Dr. Vannevar Bush, who was the science advisor to President Roosevelt in the waning months of World War II. That report set out an implicit social contract, a basic compact, if you will, that has guided the relationship between science and society ever since, including in Canada. Fast forward 75 years, and much of the underlying assumptions of that post-war era have shifted, and it is time for a fundamental rethink of the social contract. Let me share some data. According to polling, 83% of Canadians trust scientists, which is an encouraging data point, especially when compared with the much lower levels of trust in politicians or business leaders. But the polling also shows that 58% think scientists are elitist, and nearly half think that they are not as ethical as they should be. Nearly 2/3 think that government does not understand emerging technologies enough to regulate them effectively, and receptivity to future technologies is weakening as Canadians worry, for example, about losing their jobs to automation. In this context, commentators are saying research cannot fulfill its social contract and reach new horizons by advancing on the same footing into the future. As a first phase of the broader social contract initiative, in January, we launched a project called Government Science and Innovation in the New Normal, or Gsyn. The objective of Gsyn is to support medium-term planning for the federal departments and agencies to help ensure that science and innovation remain relevant in this new reality. We've built a research consortium consisting to date of 7 federal departments and agencies, and we're eager to expand that further. Phase 2 will then broaden the scope to players beyond the federal family, including academia, NGOs, the private sector, and civil society, to provide an in-depth examination of this evolving relationship between science, innovation, and society. It is an ambitious, broad-based initiative, and we're developing research papers to explore many key themes, including mission-driven research, inclusive innovation, EDI, interdisciplinary, indigenous, and other ways of knowing, global research collaboration and infrastructure, science integrity and ethics, public engagement, and skills, and all within the context of this post-truth, post-trust era. To kick off the Gsyn project, we began with a hindsight exercise to look back over the last year or so at the impacts of the pandemic on government science and innovation, and to ask what worked well, what could have worked better. To explore these questions, we held a workshop and focus groups with government researchers. We've compiled what we learned in a report that will be available on our new website next week. And we're now using a series of foresight workshops to look or to shift our gaze forward and consider the implications of the new normal. But tonight, we wanted to share some of the early insights, especially from the hindsight exercise. For that, I'm joined by 3 panelists who have participated in the research and who bring an array of perspectives that reflect the breadth of government science and innovation, which includes regulatory science, research and development, and related scientific activities, or RSA. RSA is something that is not well known beyond government. It's a terminology that's used primarily inside government, and it refers to the data collection, surveillance, other types of long-term data collection activities that are central to delivering on government's mandate, but are not typically the types of activities done in academia, the private sector, or elsewhere within the science and innovation system. So this regulatory science and RSA, as well as R&D, are very important functions to deliver on government mandates. Tonight, we're joined by 3 panelists. I'll just introduce them, and then we'll turn it over to them for their opening remarks. So Paul Estelle works at the Communications Research Center, CRC, which is the federal government's Center of Excellence on wireless and wireless spectrum usage. The CRC provides scientific advice to its parent, the spectrum regulator. Paul has spent his career working mainly in research and advanced technology development, and during that time has observed dramatic differences in wireless technology, but also the way that researchers work together. In particular, the CRC has made some major changes in how research is done since it fully embraced cloud technology and learned to apply big data analytics and high-performance computing to wireless spectrum problems. Welcome, Paul. Isabelle Tremblay is the Laboratory Director at Measurement Canada, an agency of ISED, Innovation Science and Economic Development Canada. She is also a champion for LGBTQ2+ and women in STEM. Isabelle has more than 24 years of experience in a metrology laboratory environment. In her role, she leads multiple laboratories responsible for the calibration of the devices used by inspectors who verify the functioning of instruments used in trade, such as scales, gas meters, electricity meters, and gas pumps. I often think of Measurement Canada as I'm filling up my gas tank because there's a little sticker on the pump that shows the last time it has been inspected by a Measurement Canada inspector. And finally, we'll be joined by Dr. Esther Salvano. Esther has worked in the agriculture sector for more than 20 years and is currently the Director General of the Grain Research Laboratory with the Canadian Grain Commission located in Winnipeg. Esther previously held positions with Ag Canada and with Manitoba Agriculture. Her experience at both levels of government, working with a wide range of industry and scientific stakeholders, enables her to provide expert science-based research and analysis. I'm also proud to say that Esther is a graduate of IOG's Leadership Development Program in Science and Innovation, as she brings strong leadership and collaboration competencies to her work. So without further ado, I'll ask each of our speakers to provide some opening remarks about the experiences of their labs during the pandemic, and then we will open the floor for questions from you, the audience. So Paul, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jeff, for that kind introduction, and welcome everybody. So as Jeff said, I work for the CRC, which is part of the wireless spectrum regulator. But I have to emphasize that the CRC is not a regulatory science outfit. We're an R&D or discovery science outfit. And as such, most of our scientists are primarily analytical in the work that they do to provide the analyses and advice and tools to our parent, the spectrum regulator. So while we're mainly analytical and we do a lot of work in modeling, prediction, simulation, we are nevertheless fully grounded in the hard realities of physics, which means measurements. And those measurements are taken in our lab, or very often in our case, into the field as well. And I should perhaps do an aside, a couple of asides actually. When I say lab, in the wireless context, don't think white coats and test tubes, but rather think benches with expensive-looking large boxes connected with expensive-looking cables, all connected up via computers. And we gather our data and control our experiments that way. And based on that, we can develop the analyses that are relevant to what we do. And I'm using the word scientist for the people who do this work. And I was looking in the chat before we started. I'm going to use it loosely because it covers a variety of different skill sets at the CRC, so radio scientists, mathematicians, engineers, etc. But I'll use the word scientists or researchers for tonight. One thing that Jeff mentioned, which is actually very important to my story about what happened over the last year, is that the CRC moved completely to the cloud for all its scientific computing and data storage needs. That was in response to a situation which I've found is very common amongst my colleagues across science-based departments and agencies across the government, is that we're increasingly getting large data sets, which we need to analyze. We need high-performance computing. We need AI and machine learning tools. We need advanced visualization tools. And we found that the only way to accelerate our progress in those domains was to move into the public cloud rather than stay within the confines of data centers. And that actually changed the way the CRC has developed its expertise. So now we've gone beyond the core competency of radio science. And we are working in big data analytics and AI and visualizations, and we do have a data science team. So that's an important thing to understand what I'm about to tell you. So when we received the work from home order over a year ago now, actually in practice, for many people who are not directly involved in the actual lab measurements, it was relatively uninterrupted working. Because people were used to collaborating in the cloud, the department, ISED, where I work, had recently rolled out tools like MS Teams. So they were actually able to continue to work much in the same way they had actually physically in the lab. And moreover, with the skills that they had learned, particularly the data science team, they were able to pivot from analyzing spectrum measurement data that we had already acquired, rather than to analyze it in terms of signal quality and signal strength measurements across time and across the country, but rather they can analyze it to come up with some gross movement patterns of people based on wireless measurements, which we were able to offer to the Public Health Agency of Canada to say, hey, this is how people are moving across the country, which enabled the Public Health Agency to correlate movement patterns with disease outbreaks, and moreover, the levels of compliance with various lockdown orders across the country. And that work has been going on for the last year, and we're still providing that insight to the Public Health Agency, which again is informing their interactions with their colleagues at the provinces and territories. So that was an important change, which only happened because we had prior to that made a move into the cloud. But just thinking back about the lab issue itself, well, of course, lab issue was a big, lab access was a big issue, and we had to put all our experimentation on hold. We had the luxury of being a discovery science outfit that we did not have any regulatory need to immediately be doing lab work. You'll hear differently from my colleagues on the panel tonight. So really for us, the challenge was PPE was mainly for our research IT lab techs who were working on prepping computers. Because we went to work from home in March, but in beginning of May, we had to onboard 20 students from all across the country. So we had to prep these research computers and ship them all across the country and get everybody working remotely. And that was a real interesting way of learning how to do that kind of new work on the fly while not being able to actually be in the same room together. So, but having said that, that was great for, again, this analytical work. It didn't solve our lab problem. So one of the things that we did is we worked with Shared Services Canada, which is responsible for all IT networking in the government of Canada, to establish a secure and flexible remote access solution to our lab to allow researchers to connect from home to the lab, much in the same way they've been connecting from home to the cloud, in order to run measurements and modify experiments and continue the collection of data, which then went straight up into the cloud and aided our work in the analytical work we were doing. And of course, we had to develop a whole bunch of new processes that go with that, because in the past, it was common for our researchers to walk into the lab, gather equipment and cables and do what they need to do and assemble their equipment. But now we wanted to limit the interaction. So we had new processes such that we would have a lab tech who would come in and do all that work to do one thing, an IT tech would come and configure all the networking, and then the researcher would come and do the last configurations. So we limited interaction with people by use of process and by use of this secure remote access technology, which actually with Shared Services Canada, we have been offering to other science-based departments and agencies as a model for those who have equipment which supports remote access to be using for them. So really, we've made some big changes over the last year. I'm going to limit my my opening remarks to that. I have a lot more to say about what that meant for the people and the way the people have been working, but hopefully we'll come to that later.
Okay, thank you, Paul. And just a reminder that after we hear from Isabel and Esther, we will be going to the audience for questions. So don't hesitate to start thinking about what your questions or comments might be, and entering those into the chat function. Isabel, over to you.
All right, can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
Perfect. All righty. So thank you for the introduction, Jeff. Like you said, I'm presently the lab director for Measurement Canada. And Measurement Canada is responsible for ensuring the accuracy in selling of measured goods. We develop and enforce the laws. We approve and calibrate the devices used for trade. Basically, we make sure that you get what you pay for. Like Jeff was saying, most people recognize our name from the sticker on the gas pumps and the grocery scales. They used to be the round stickers, and now they're a bit more of a rectangular sticker. But we're also involved in other types of trade, like Jeff was saying, the electricity meters, the gas meters that are on the side of your house, but also involved in certain industries where multi-million dollars are exchanged on a daily basis, like upstream natural gas. Today, I'm going to chat a little bit about what happened to our lab when COVID hit in March 2020. Like everywhere else, we shut down our lab, and we are considered essential workers, though. So when we say essential workers, it's not like doctors and nurses, but more like a tier 2, where we're a twofold reason. First of all, because of the law, the law states that you have to have and use calibrated instruments. So we must make sure that everybody that's trading has calibrated instruments. Also, on the scientific aspect, we want to make sure that when something is sold on the basis of a measurement, it's sold fairly. That means a correct measurement. And when I was talking about the multi-million dollar exchanges, that's very important, but it's also important for every single person that is buying electricity or gas at the gas pump. Unfortunately, we had a business continuity plan that did not speak of events such as pandemics. It spoke about electricity problems in the building, when somebody very important were to be sick or find another job somewhere else, but it did not speak of complete shutdown. So I employed my best Google skills, and like a good little scientist, I started researching solutions. And one of the things that I needed and that helped me was a COVID task force. So I was not going to start doing everything myself. I had lots of ideas, but I could not implement everything. So ideas came pretty fast when you start looking into it. I easily found over 35 new protocols and processes that I put in place in order to reopen the lab as fast as possible. So I'll speak in a couple seconds about the immediate things that I did, the short-term things, and the longer-term protocols. In terms of immediate needs, we had to order a lot of PPE. PPE such as glasses, gloves, sanitizing gel, mask, face shields, sanitizing wipes. We had to provide the employees with this PPE. And we needed to give them information about how to train to use this actual new type of PPE. They had PPE to perform their functions before, but this was another layer of PPE on top of everything. Little things like that were deemed important were sign-in sheets, for example. When somebody was to come into work, they needed to sign in to make sure that we knew who was in the building. We also limited the number of employees to a third of the maximum number of employees that the building could sustain on a regular basis. We put rotation of employees depending on what the functions were for each employee. Some of them would come in from 6 to noon, and then another set from noon to 6 p.m. We also talked a lot to the employees about their pain points, and some of them, especially in the beginning, were afraid of taking the bus. And so we implemented new parking management in order to remove that whole anxiety. We tracked the number of contractors that were coming into our building as well, just to make sure that we were keeping the number of people in the building pretty low. We increased fresh air to 100% in the building. Usually it has a bit of a lower percentage, but we increased it to 100%, increased the change in the HVAC filters as well. We did a lot of signage, and we moved so fast that we had to find and make our own signage in order to inform all of the employees. At the time, corporate did not have any new signage available to us. So we started off by making our own. Later on, they caught up with us. But in the beginning, we just made our own signage. And the signage I'm talking about is limiting the number of employees or people in the kitchens, in the bathrooms, in the labs themselves, in the meeting rooms. Signage for directing the people down the halls and up the stairs. That's basically putting tape on the floor. And so that's what I did for a whole weekend. I put tape on the floor and on the walls, directing people. What else did we do? Cleaning protocols, very important for in the labs, just to make sure that we were limiting the exposure to COVID. We made sure that we put in place new cleaning protocols for all of the surfaces and the equipment. Now that's tricky because depending on what kind of equipment you're handling, you may want to clean it or not want to clean it. By cleaning it, you may change its temperature, you may affect its accuracy. It's very, very tricky. So cleaning scientific equipment was not that simple. There was a lot more things, just like we talked about before, equipping all the staff with work from home IT equipment. That was done pretty fast. Longer things protocols that will stay for longer will be simple things that we don't think about necessarily right from the beginning, but removing the gender limitations for the bathroom. So because there were about 30 to 40 people on one floor, we have 2 washrooms, one that was for female employees and one for male employees. But normally there'd be lots of in and outs and multiple people inside those washrooms. Well, now we only had basically 2 stalls. So I had to remove the gender limitations to the bathroom so that each person would have a choice of 2 washrooms, and then limit the number of employees that are waiting at the door. Because there was such a change in the number of employees in the building, we had to review the first aid, CPR, and defibrillator certified employees. So I needed to maximize that. And so I brought in somebody to recertify everybody that was in the building. Something else that I did that I think was tricky to implement at first, but now everybody's used to it, is keeping employees from the different labs separate. We have multiple labs. We have a gas lab, electricity lab, a volume lab, and a mass lab. And on a regular basis, they wouldn't interact with each other. And so I wanted to make sure that they still wouldn't interact with each other, or as little as possible. Just in case there was going to be a COVID case in one of the labs, it would not affect the three others. The one lab would be closed off, everybody would be sent home, or just prevent them from coming in case there was going to be a potential COVID case. So that also helped out quite a bit. I'm going to leave it to that for now. We can chat a little bit later if you have any more questions, because I put in a lot more protocols, and I can make a pretty big list available to anybody that has the interest.
Excellent. Thank you, Isabel. I think even just the list you've already gone through really illustrates the difference between, say, what we had to do for policy analysts versus people who were working in the labs and making sure that the Canadians stay safe. Okay, let's go to Esther, and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience. Esther, over to you.
Thank you, Jeff. So I'm the Director General of the Grain Research Lab. We are located downtown Winnipeg. What is the Canadian Grain Commission? We work in the interest of grain producer. We are, sorry, I have a phone call. We are guided by the Canada Grain Act. We are establishing and maintaining standards for quality for Canadian grain. We are regulating the grain handling in Canada and ensure that the grain is a dependable commodity for domestic and export market. We are considered an enforcement and regulatory department. The Canadian Grain Commission was formed at the same time of the Canadian Grain Act in 1912, and the GRL, the Grain Research Lab, was created in 1914. So what do we do at the lab? We undertake and promote scientific research on grains and grain products to ensure the quality and safety of Canadian grain. We also enhance the marketability of Canadian grains through research and use functionality, evaluation, monitoring, and analytical services. And we provide the scientific basis for establishing and maintaining standards of quality and safety for Canadian grain. So we have 70 employees. The research conducted falls into two categories: the crop research and technology research. We have 9 programs who also support 4 key activities for the Commission: request for service analysis, cargo quality monitoring, plant breeder line evaluation, and our biggest program, the harvest sample program that we have been running since 1927. That program is so important for the lab because without the grain samples from the producers, we couldn't do the research and quality assurance that we do. What we have been up to since March. So we sent everybody home March 16, and after a short pause, we have resumed our critical services, mostly services analysis and cargo monitoring. I'm not repeat what Isabel said, but we went through a similar process in terms of physical distancing, the PPEs. We also implemented an in-house scheduling and reporting. The managers were not happy with me, but we did what we had to do. So that way we could schedule and respect the maximum occupancy of 30% in the building. And also the reporting allowed us to see the pressure on the building. And it was useful when we had suspected cases. We had a lot of them at the beginning, a lot of them at during the second wave. Fortunately, knock on wood, we didn't have any positive cases. So through the reporting and during at the beginning, when we started to see what was happening, we also developed with our OSH group a case management process. So we have, oh my God, I think it's 12 scenarios And depending on the scenarios, it will trigger certain actions. We try to be as transparent as possible with the respect of confidentiality. It's sometimes challenging. The managers, the scientists, they all want to know where, when, who, but we develop a system that allow us to keep people safe. I'm proud to say that what we did in the lab, since we were the only one back in the building, maybe I should have mentioned that there's approximately 250 people who works for the commission at headquarters. So we set the pace, we developed the tools, and now it's what the commission, the rest of the other divisions are using. Last summer, we were able to focus on our two main programs, and it ended. We were able to finish the activities late December, and after that, we have resumed research and development activities, and also collaborative projects. So it has created some delay in the research and development, but we couldn't do otherwise. So that's the impact on the science. The impact on people, I think that I don't have to elaborate on that. I'm proud to say that my group, the division, did really, really good. They adapted, they were flexible. We have enhanced our communication, and I think it paid off. People got the feeling that they were in the loop at all time. It's not always to change a routine, and the people in the lab are big routine people, but they have adapted. Paul mentioned MS Teams. We were lucky because just before we were sent home, we roll out MS Teams. So it was a tool to communicate. We needed to also adapt working from home. It was challenging. We didn't have all the tools, so there was a lot of work done. And it's still ongoing because we were able to launch our mobile strategy quicker, but it was not quick enough. Impact on innovation. Personally, I think it was positive. We have implemented remote work, remote access to instrument. Most people have a hybrid mode, so they go to the lab a few days out of the week. Some programs learned to be more efficient. We needed to adapt our workflow, our workspace, and we find new way of communicating and managing. And it's that part will stay, and we will still need to continue to work on that. What's next? In Manitoba, we're in the midst of the third wave. The restriction have not impacted the work, but it's outside of the work. So we try to accommodate and support the staff. So that's it. And we have started to talk about reintegration. And for us, we have decided that the timeline is the end of September. So that's our objective, but it's quite complicated. So that's it.
Well, thank you. I'm sure it is very complicated, but I'm really struck, Esther. I think I heard the word proud twice, at least in your comments, and it has really struck while Rhonda and I both during this hindsight exercise, just how often the word pride comes up in terms of government scientists and their ability to adapt during this just unprecedented time to continue to serve Canadians. So I think it's an undertold story that hopefully we can help tell more. Okay, so now I'm going to open it up obviously for questions. Please enter any questions you have into the chat or raise your hand. And just to kick things off, I'm going to throw one question out first, again, using the moderator's privilege. So thank you all for talking about sort of, what had to happen over the last year. Obviously, an obvious question is, how sustainable will these changes be as we go forward? I'm also thinking about the fact that the government has obviously committed $2.8 billion to Laboratories Canada and to the renewal of federal laboratories within the system. I'm just wondering if you can, maybe I'll go to Paul first, wondering what your thoughts are in terms of what the implications are of what we've seen over the last year in terms of going forward into new government laboratory spaces.
Yeah, so one of the things that we've been thinking about is how sustainable is it going to be going forward to have people not in the office? There are some people who love it. In fact, in our case, one of our researchers moved to Vancouver Island, another one went to New Brunswick. And because of the way we're working, it seems to be working just fine. Longer term, one of the things, we have a couple of concerns that we're thinking about. One is that it's very hard to onboard new people. We've been doing it a lot with our students. We onboard 20 students 3 times a year, roughly. And they all tell a similar story. It's very hard to get to know people. We've got a couple of young new grads brought on as well. So it's okay for now, but longer term, how will we integrate these new people in? And what goes with that, one of the other concerns we have is how will the physical separation affect that creativity that you get when you're physically together around the whiteboard, talking in the coffee room, ideas start to flow. There's no online equivalent for that. So I think there's going to be very much a hybrid model for those who kind of like what we're doing, but how it will evolve over time, I think is still very open for debate. We'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. I find Zoom and MS Teams are amazing for what they can do, but they don't replicate that gathering around a whiteboard that we're used to. Others have views, Isabel or Esther?
Sure. Just to speak a little bit more about what Paul was saying with new employees. We have quite a few new employees. Students like Paul, but also new employees. And I find that the other members of the other labs, when they see new employees, and actually when they see them like this, they don't necessarily know what they look like, and they would never recognize them anywhere else than with a mask or however, right? And I find it funny, but because we are presently the only people in the building, so we're at Tunney's Pasture in the middle of Ottawa, and Tunney's Pasture usually has about 10,000 people. Well, at the moment, there is no one, nowhere, except for my main floor in my building. And what we've decided to do is grab the TVs. So we have TVs in the building, and we've decided to make them our own. And when we have new employees, we'll put a little bio, we'll put a photo of with and without mask, and just present them to the others this way, because we've had so many new employees that we don't really recognize them anymore. And to that effect, with my managers last week, we discussed putting up photos of the actual groups. So in the next few months, when it gets nicer outside, we're going to take a photo of the mass lab, for example, with everybody in there. And these are the people that work in the mass lab. And this is what the mass lab does. And so they'll get to see the new groups without masks. And I still want them to become familiar with each other within their same group, right? No interactions between groups. And that creates this camaraderie. I don't know if you know what that means. It's yeah. And I found this, how do you say that? Camaraderie?
Camaraderie.
Camaraderie was very important when it came time to bring everybody back, because they all felt a need to contribute to whatever the group was doing. Employees were called back on a voluntary basis. They didn't need to come back. They could perform some duties from home. but I found that everybody stepped up. Everybody was proud, just like Esther was saying, everybody wanted in on the action and wanted to contribute. And I'm going to say that it's because they really feel like they depend on one another. And that came from before. And so I want to bring this back.
Right. So that'll be a challenge if we continue to work remotely. But yeah, absolutely. Esther, long-term implications?
A long-term implication. We've been in that building since 1972. The infrastructures are crumbling, are old, so we are in the midst of finding a new place. So what will be the impact? The footprint, we will need most likely less for the office side of things, because some people will have the possibility of working from home, having an hybrid model. For the lab, it's a bit challenging. When you are a technician, your work is in the lab, but there's still some things that you can do from home. And the configuration or the design of the lab space will have to be different, I'm pretty sure, because we will need to take into consideration the physical, the current physical requirements. Even if COVID is partly behind us, people got used to that. They like to have space, and I know that it will stay for a long time with staff, the way that the flow is, and not to be in crowded spaces. So for me, it's that side of it, the impact that will last. We're going to continue to innovate. I think that people like working from home. I know across certain departments, 60% of the people are saying that, no, I want to stay working to stay home to work. I'm not sure if the lab it will be the same, but we're going to continue to look at technology and ways of facilitating that.
So on that note about using technology, Walter asked a question about the extent to which innovation in automation and remote control via connected devices could alleviate your work both during the pandemic and persist after.
That's a good question. We have started to look at that. It's not always easy with the security requirements. For certain instruments, it was an easy fix, and it is working. It's expensive, but I think that everybody is willing to invest and to do that. Part of our labs are ISO 17025, so it adds a layer when we want to do remote access. But no, it's doable, and in our future capital investment, it will always be included from now on.
Okay, great. Isabel, any thoughts about remote controlled instruments?
Unfortunately, when you think of lab, for me, it's lab coats, pipettes, scales, environmental chamber, heating baths, anything, all the tools that you imagine when you think lab. Yeah, those are the types of things that we deal with. So in terms of digitization and automation, we are doing the maximum that we can. For example, in the smart meters, smart meters have been around since about 2007. We've been evaluating them since then. There's a lot of automation that can be done with a device such as that one. That type of device is basically a computer with an attachment to it that does a measurement, right? So anything that's as simple as that is fine. But when we evaluate devices and calibrate devices for its detector mode, for example, a thermometer, thermometers are evaluated in oil baths, silicone oil baths, and they're calibrated very simply by performing a one-to-one comparison. So we put the known thermometer in the oil bath, and then we put the device under test, and then we compare the reading out of that. Not every thermometer can be read offline or by a computer or something digital.
Mhm.
So a lot of them are old-fashioned, and you have to read the LCD display on them.
Right.
The report that's done afterwards, though, all of that can be done from home. So like Esther was saying, we're finding new tasks that can be done from home. Creating the report, we've worked a lot on our ISO 17025 accreditation in the last year, just because a lot of the employees, when they're not in the lab, they have to do some work from home tasks, and that's a really good one. Developing alternate procedures to the ones that we know and we're comfortable with to do some of the evaluations on the devices. It doesn't have to happen in the lab. It can be done from home.
Absolutely. Okay, good. Paul, I might come to you on this one. We've got a question from our YouTube channel. The person says, I'm also curious about whether they face challenges getting instrument data to the scientists, cloud space, or home computers. Some instruments collect incredibly large amounts of data.
Yes, so in our case, there's multiple facets to that question. Some of our equipment is simply quite old and doesn't lend itself very readily to getting data out of it and up into the cloud. But if we assume that we can get past that problem, at the CRC, our labs in the CRC are connected by a very high-speed internet connection through the Canary network to the cloud. So actually, we can upload vast amounts of data into the cloud. And like I was saying at the beginning, so one of the reasons that we wanted to go into the cloud in the first place is that we were collecting more and more information, and then how you store it, how you process it requires the kind of performance you can't get. Excuse me, you simply can't get on a desktop computer, or even on a government data center. You've got to go into the cloud, and we've been doing it from that way, from lab-based measurements, where we're putting a lot of data directly into the cloud. We are also using IoT. We've been using IoT for a few years, experimenting with, in our case, to inform the spectrum regulator, we have to do, like, if you like, an environmental assessment. So we want to know, how is the spectrum being used in all these different places around the country, and different bands with different types of applications. And so not only were we experimenting with that, we found that there are companies who are providing that kind of service. So now when you've got dozens, hundreds, thousands of sensors all feeding into the cloud, you've got a lot of large data problem too, but nevertheless, it's coming in relatively small streams to be aggregated in the cloud. And that, we think, is going to be a key part of how certainly environmental monitoring for spectrum is going to be done in the future. And we've recently had a collaboration with Environment and Climate Change Canada, who've also been using IoT air quality sensors. And they're now using that data to augment their centralized kind of like big iron type of very formal air quality sensors. So I think, yeah, there's going to be applications for IoT and automation of measurement collecting in government for be the norm in days to come. Certainly for that type of science, anyway.
And are you confident that the lessons that you've learned at CRC can be shared with other science-based departments? Is that happening? Is there a forum or a table where that's happening yet?
There's no forum, but we are open for collaboration. Environment is a good example. We worked with these guys because when they knew about what we were doing with wireless sensors, and they were interested in enhancing their air quality monitoring capability, we did a collaboration. Years ago, we did a collaboration with the Public Health Agency again, who were actually very prescient on their behalf, worrying about a time where they would have to do massive amounts of genomic sequencing in a big hurry in order to respond to a public health outbreak. So we worked with them and taught them how to cloud, and at the same time we learned from them how to do high performance compute, which we've used in our own work as well. So there's already quite a bit of collaboration within science-based departments and agencies.
Excellent. That's encouraging to hear. Isabel, I want to come back to you. You mentioned how your organization's business continuity plan had not envisioned, the length of time and just the impact. So I'm wondering, as again, as we look forward, and getting back to those people aspects of the implications, Are you confident that we've learned these lessons and that we'll build these types of things into our future business continuity plans?
Wow, that's a loaded question. Yeah,
Sorry.
for sure, we have to work on a new business continuity plan, but like everything in government these days, everything is based off of risk. And it's a question of identifying all those risks and putting them in categories and trying to find solutions for those different risks and categories within the business continuity plan. For example, if part of my lab were to suffer from fire, let's say, my mass lab, there's a fire in it. In the business continuity plan, it is said that the NRC would be our backup. So this is something that we think about. We couldn't think about global pandemic if everything does shut down. But in the business continuity plan allows for certain shutdown periods. If you just can't help it, there is a certain shutdown period, a maximum, and then you have to find solutions. For example, my lab, my calibration and approval lab, allows for 48 hours of shutdown. That's the max. Afterwards, we need to find solutions. We shut down for a total of 2 weeks. We were back open on March 23rd. And because we couldn't provide the services to the Canadians, we started utilizing other things than the lab to be able to certify devices. Now, this is where the math and the scientists get very excited. We went back and looked at the data sets that we had from previous calibrations, tracking how long and how bad the devices came back. So we have some weights, for example, that calibration weight kits that we do for Esther, they come to Measurement Canada and we perform calibrations on their weight kits. The weights come back every single year, and we have data going back 70 years for each weight kit.
Okay.
And so we know from their use with that weight kit, when it comes back after a year, how bad is it? And we took that data, analyzed it statistically, and decided, okay, well, for that weight kit with that utilization, we can give you an extended certificate without actually performing the calibrations for another 2-3 months. We're confident that the weights that you're going to be using, they're still going to be pretty darn good for the next 2-3 months. So we extended certificates. In terms of employees, did you have a specific question about what to do with the employees?
You had mentioned that you had more to share about the people aspects. So I just wanted to give you that opportunity.
Oh, yes. So the people aspect, they learned to perform new tasks when they were stuck to work from home. I talked about the quality management system, but there's also increased online training. I know the federal government at large is very keen on online training, but for Measurement Canada, what's very special about it, another thing that's very special about it, is that its role is global. There is an equivalent to Measurement Canada in pretty much every single country around the world. And so we can share some of our knowledge with them. And it turns out that the NPL in the UK, they were going through the same things as us, and they put together some online training, and I piggybacked on that. I just called up my counterparts in the UK and I said, hey, I want in on that training. Are you willing to share? And they opened it up to everybody else, anybody that, all the contacts that we have on a global scale, they shared everything with them. So it was really good in terms of training.
All right, good. Other questions from the audience? Don't be bashful. Okay, well, I, of course, will have more questions, so I'll just keep asking them until others think of their own. So the three of you are the work that you do is mostly lab based. I get that. I'm wondering though if any of you can speak to the issue of field research and how the loss of a potential field research season last summer was a difficult thing for government science, and in particular, I'm thinking, the long-term data sets that we collect as government scientists. Some of those may have been interrupted, and there may be longer-term implications of that. Can any of you speak to that challenge? Esther?
I can say a few things. So we're not doing field research, but it's related to the program that I mentioned, the RV sample program. These are samples from the producers. They want to have information on their grain. They want the grading and different parameters. So we were able to continue. It was important that we deliver that. We work closely with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, and their field research was impacted. So it has created some delay in our research, but I believe that they did their best to continue and put in place the measures to continue the research. For them, the priority was really field research. So when they were able to bring back into the research station people, it was solely for research on the field. Yeah.
Okay, good, thanks. So Ezra asks, what did you learn about what really needs people, in terms of what functions really need people, and what could not be done by artificial intelligence, let's say?
So if I can, I'll give you one example. So as you know, the government, one of the big priorities for the government is for connecting rural and northern Canadians. So the Universal Broadband Fund. So the sector in which I work is responsible for administering that. So one of the things that we've been looking is to try and help companies who are providing proposals to provide wireless connectivity to remote communities to evaluate whether it's actually going to work, because traditionally you'd have to send trucks out and people making measurements. It's very expensive, it's very slow, and it slows down the process of getting the actual wireless systems delivered reliably to Canadians. So we've been developing some AI techniques based on looking at some high precision mapping and understanding the propagation that we do understand as radio scientists, to try and predict where you can and cannot actually be able to get good connectivity. It turns out it's an AI problem. So we're actually using that to accelerate how the universal broadband connectivity is going to work out for all Canadians.
All right, excellent. And we've got perhaps one last question from Walter. He asks, is there anywhere in government that deals with impacts on social policy of new technologies or science, or entirely new technology paradigms? Any thoughts on that? It's actually something we think about here at IOG quite a bit. Any thoughts? No. I'll just I'll tell a quick story that relates to this and our concern about this as well, Walter. That a couple of years ago, there was a map produced that showed that in the U.S., in 29 of 50 states, truck drivers, broadly defined, is the #1 occupation in those 29 states. And it got me thinking that as we pursue AI and autonomous vehicles, there's obviously the potential that we're going to put a lot of truck drivers out of work, and it's not clear that anyone in the Canadian government is actually tasked with thinking about those broader social and political implications. Political, because if you look at the map, the 29 states they overlap quite a bit with the 29 or the states that Trump won in 2016. So you can imagine if you put 3.5 million truckers out of work and they are largely part of a certain political base, then it'll have some pretty impactful social and political implications. And yeah, it's not clear to me where within government that kind of thinking is being done. Although I see in the chat now that both Ezra and Isabel are suggesting perhaps PCO and Impact Canada are doing that kind of thinking. So that's encouraging to hear if that's true. Okay, we've got 7 o'clock, so let's wrap up the formal part of the program. I want to extend a huge thank you to Paul, Isabel, and Esther, and invite